Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 23rd Annual National Book Festival. How's everyone doing today? You guys doing well? Enjoying your morning? Today, I have with me a very, very special guest. He goes by the name of Daniel Neri. Have any of you read his new book yet? Anyone? No? All right. Well, that's the goal today. We're going to get you to read it. Daniel immigrated to the United States with his family when he was only 8 years old, seeking asylum as a refugee from Iran. Now, uprooting your life as a refugee and moving across the world to Oklahoma, of all places, as a brown man, is a novel in and of itself, which he wrote, and it was amazing. It won the Michael L. Prince Award, the Christopher Medal, and the Middle Eastern Book Award. He now lives in North Carolina with his wife and son and has blessed us with a new story called The Many Assassinations of Samir, the Seller of Dreams. Now, please give me a hand in welcoming him to the stage, please. Of course. Yes, you do.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. We're improvising a seat for me, so give me a second as I prepare myself to sit crisscross applesauce. Which takes a minute when you're older. All right, we're gonna get unformal here. Okay. All right, it didn't pop. We're okay. We're all right. I was prepared for the humiliating exercise of popping a beanbag in front of all of you as my first trick. But we're good. We're good. There's no tension here anymore. So welcome. Thank you for coming. This is quite a crowd. Bill, do you want to ask a question, or do you want me to just vamp about it?
Let's hear about the book.
Well, I also have a lot of thoughts on beanbags in general.
Let's get a 30-second beanbag speech and then go for it.
Beanbags. Well, I mean, the top tier of beanbags, of course, are those like half sphere chairs that are like made out of wicker and bamboo. Have you ever sat in one of those? You can read in them for hours, and then you can fall asleep, and your neck won't hurt, and then you can wake up and keep reading. It's like a little reading nook anywhere in the world. That might be my favorite kind of beanbag.
What about the supermassive ones from Costco?
I've never seen those. Are those great?
You can get them as big as a couch.
Well, I think we should be figuring out how to get everybody one of those.
I know. They really skimped on your guys' beanbags.
No. This is great. I don't know about y'all, but my lower back's feeling great. But go ahead.
Yeah, well, let's hear about the book. First, you want to just tell us a little bit about what it's about?
Sure, yeah. So this is called The Many Assassinations of Samir, the Seller of Dreams. And if there was any more room, I would have added a few more words because I love long titles. It's a book set in a part of the world at a time that is not as familiar as others. It's set in the Silk Road, and the Silk Road is a term that we use for a network of trade routes, which means sort of just paths that merchants would walk all the way from the sort of far eastern China in a city called, back then it was called Chang'an, now it's called Xi'an, and it goes all the way across China, which is already a large mass of land, right, and goes into western China to another capital called Turfan. Sometimes nowadays it's called Turpan, right? And then you go over a massive desert. I'll tell you about that in a second because it's the coolest place on earth. And then you go over some massive mountains, and if you like hang a left, you'll get into like the Himalayas and things. But you'll go over those, and you'll land in another capital called Samarkand, which is in modern-day Uzbekistan. And then if you keep going, you'll go to Baghdad. And of course, if you keep going, you'll eventually get to Venice, right? And famously, we know that there was a merchant named Marco Polo, a great poolside game, but also a person. And he came all the way from Venice. And in fact, we even have evidence that there were traders from as far as Ireland. So you're talking about Ireland to eastern China, right? Basically the entire landmass of Asia and Europe, right? And at that time, it was all of the world for that group of people, right? So that time, and now let's talk about the time period. It's all the way from the 4th century to the 11th century. So again, a gigantic chunk of time. During that time, there was more religions and languages and people groups passing through these trade routes than modern day New York. So it's just a gigantically diverse time. It's a huge span of time. And I wanted to tell the story of a merchant who was in one particular chunk of that. He was going because nobody ever really traveled the whole way. That would be amazing. But really what you would do is you would go to one city, buy a bunch of the goods that were maybe coming from farther east. Then you would travel to the next city. And from there, it might be harder to get a hold of those goods. So it might be silk, or it might be walnuts. It could be turmeric. It could be all kinds of things. You would pack them onto your pack animals. You would travel to the next city, and you would sell them in the marketplace there. And because they were rarer there, you could make a profit. And then you would go buy some of their goods with the money you made and take it back to the city over on the other side. So that was the life of a merchant. They were on the road almost all the time. They were on these gigantic moving cities almost called caravans and caravans were hundreds and hundreds of animals. It was not a small endeavor. And there would be camels, there would be tarpan horses, they would be laden with tons of goods, and then you'd be traveling across some of the harshest environments in the world. And this is what I was very excited about, because there's a desert there called the Taklamakan Desert. The Taklamakan is, in my language, in Farsi, it means the place of no return. That desert is the largest shifting sand dune desert in the world. Some of the sand dunes get up to be 1,600 feet above your head. So you're talking about basically, imagine a building, but it's shifting. And it is called, it's a haunted desert because as I said, it's a shifting sand dune desert. And so it has just moved over entire villages and eaten them. Some people call it the eater of cities. So I just loved this place. I loved the idea of someone traveling across it. And I wondered who could possibly do that with a smile on their face, because it sounds like the most terrifying, miserable, uncomfortable kind of experience. But I imagined there would be someone, right? There would be someone going from village to village. And that is where the character of Samir was born, because that's who he is. He's this huckster, he's a merchant, he's a storyteller, and he goes from village to village swindling people. And he telling the stories of his products and making them seem bigger and bigger than they are, and as a result, selling them for more and more, right? At the beginning of the story, what happens is you find out, of course, that these villages were not too happy about that. So they each hired a different assassin to come and kill him. And you're getting the story from the perspective of his little servant boy, whose name, he was born and raised in a monastery. So as he's a monk, and Samir calls him Monkey. And so Monkey is telling you the story. He's telling you about his master Samir, who he perceives as a very unserious man, as a liar, as a teller of tales. And he tells you, I'm gonna relay to you, good reader, the story of my master Samir, who managed to survive assassination from 6 different killers on our adventure across the Silk Road. But I must admit to you now that I am the one who finally succeeded. And he is the 7th and final assassin of his master Samir. So the whole story is him sort of justifying himself, is telling you why he did it, why it happens, and I promise it's appropriate.
It's appropriate.
Yeah,
Don't worry.
appropriate.
Yeah,
Cool,
yeah,
it's appropriate.
No,
He
don't
says
worry.
So yeah.
What was it like researching the Silk Road? Like, what was the most fascinating piece of information you saw?
Oh, well, so, a lot of it I sort of said. The Silk Road is, and I'll tell you the coolest thing was I was in a museum in UPenn looking at different props that people had. And there was this young woman who had been in the 6th century, so, thousands of years ago at this point, had been buried by the Taklamakan and had been mummified. And so when you saw her, she looked, you could make out her features. And she was called, I believe they call, in the museum and sort of the marketing, they called her the Beauty of Kashgar. And they had all her stuff. And one of the things that was so interesting was that as you look at it, it looked like all the stuff that a 12-year-old girl would have even now. And it had her shoes, and the shoes looked beautiful. It looked like someone had made them with care and had made them lovely. And it was the kind of shoe that if you hand it to someone now, they'd be, I think, pretty happy to wear. And she had an ivory comb, and it was beautiful. And one of the things she had was a dumpling. Like it was just like her lunch, I guess, but it was buried near her, and it was a pork dumpling, and it looked exactly like the pork dumplings I love to eat. Right? It's like classic little dough with the cinched at the top. And that blew me away. The dumpling was the most impressive thing because it was
sounds the most fascinating.
well,
the dumpling.
for centuries we've been eating this thing and it hasn't changed.
Right.
And I thought that makes me think of this person as very related to me, which is hard to do when you think back in history. You usually imagine them as being very just different, alien.
Yeah, I'm still not over the dumpling. That's amazing.
It's petrified. They wouldn't let me eat it.
Who, for your main characters, like who inspired Samir, the seller of dreams, the one who tells lies and upsells everyone? Who inspired that?
Well, my dad. So Samir is a caricature in some ways. But if you've ever been to like a bazaar in the Middle East, or if you've seen the beginning of Aladdin, the Disney cartoon, like there's a if you walk into a bazaar, you'll sometimes meet somebody who is very like aggressively trying to sell you something. Like come in, I have so much to show you, and they kind of like grab a hold of your arm, and if you find yourself in Turkey or someplace like that, like they're definitely in your personal space, and they definitely want. And sometimes I think we can. Have a reaction to that because we're used to, if we walk into Target, someone will kind of poke their head in sometimes and be like, let me know if you need anything. And you're like, cool, I'm fine. I'm just going to browse. And then you go find your thing. That's not how sales works.
They will follow you around.
So at first you would think that this would be sort of an unpleasant experience, but if you sort of go with it, if you let, sort of open yourself up to the possibility, what often will happen is they'll bring you into their stall and their market. And yes, they want to show you their carpet or their, brassware or whatever, but they'll also pour you some tea and you'll probably end up sitting there for about an hour and you'll probably hear about their whole family and you could tell them about your whole family. And it's probably like the longest visit to Target you ever anticipated, but it's lovely. And so just that experience of selling is different. And I wanted to express that because it comes with a lot of storytelling. Like you don't just buy towels like in Turkey, you buy the story that comes with the towels in Turkey. And then every time you're, walking out of the shower, you remember it. And there's something really beautiful about that. So I wanted to kind of share that dynamic. So it's not just, a sleazy salesman, an untrustworthy individual. Sometimes, they have something on offer that is really valuable and interesting. And also because it's my dad. My dad totally behaves this way. So he's always, kind of regaling you with stories that make things bigger. And I wanted to kind of do a bit of a love letter to explain what these larger-than-life people might be like. So.
Well, let's talk about the little monkey, the narrator of the story.
Sure.
Why'd you choose to write from his perspective and not anyone else's?
Because Monkey's me.
Okay.
Yeah. The dynamic between the stories. So Monkey at the very beginning of the story is about to get stoned. It opens with him. He's accidentally asked a blasphemous question. So the monks are about to stone him, and that's when in sachets Samir, the seller of dreams. And so at the very beginning, he saves Monkey's life by basically swindling the monks, right? He sells them some things and he buys the freedom of Monkey, and so Monkey becomes his servant. And at that time, when he's telling you the story, he's telling you that he'd been raised in an environment where, things were very legalistic. Things were very cut and dry. He's not excited about the ways that Samir sort of moves through society in a kind of a shifty way. And so he thinks his master is an unscrupulous person, which is another way of saying he thinks he's a liar. He thinks he's not a good guy. And so because you're seeing it from his perspective, you're sort of watching Monkey come to terms with this man who, yes, is absolutely a bit of a used car salesman, but hopefully over the course of it, you sort of see that they become a kind of family, and that Samir ends up adopting him and them becoming kind of a father-son relationship, and yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's amazing. There's one of the biggest plot twists in this book that you couldn't even possibly think of, but I'm not going to give anything away. I guess what I really want to know, and I think what some people want to know in the crowd is, if you could convey one thing about this book and one thing that you want people to take away without spoiling anything, of course, what would it be?
Oh, well, so yeah, I can't spoil it because the ending is it comes down to a particular climax that I hope you'll check out. But if there was one takeaway, so I told you about Monkey, right? And he really believes in this world of black and white and right and wrong and this sort of thing. And what really causes him to question this idea is this experience he has in the monastery. His job was to take care of two birds. And every morning he would get up and he would go to their cage and he would feed them and give them water. And they were lovebirds. They loved one another, and they were Layli and Majnun was their name, which are named after like the Romeo and Juliet of Persian folk tales. And so he describes that one morning he walked in and he saw that Layli had passed away. She had gotten ill and passed, and Majnun was despondent. He had lost the love of his life. He's a bird, but you know he's sort of he experiences it as we would. And what happens over the course of the next day is that Majnun passes as well. He was not sick, but something happened, right? He'd lost something. And so Monkey, who is part of a dualist religion, which means he sort of believes in just the simplicity of good and evil, that he says, well, okay, so there's life and death. And at one point, Layli is alive, and then she's dead. And the reason we understand for that is that he's ill. But then this other bird didn't lose anything. There was no mechanism. So what is this thing that is this third thing between life and death that is at least as important? What did Majnun lose, right? And so that's the question. The question for him is, what is that third thing that made sort of this bird's life worth living? And you know, the answer is love. It's always a love. Sorry. In case you were like, writing it down, going search out mystery. It's love. And so, but yeah, I think the takeaway of watching him actually expand, and of course, there is more nuance to that. So in the book, he's trying to understand that question, but there's also, I should point out, lest it sound boring, a bunch of murderers running around. So there's like a Viking berserker and a whirling dervish and a Mongolian gunner and a Chinese ablutionist and a rogue legion of the Roman army and all sorts of things. And
he basically pissed off everyone.
He made a lot of people angry, Samir did. Yeah. But each of those people groups were around in the Silk Road. So I wanted to come up with like a bunch of really fierce warriors to chase this guy down. Also love. There's those two things. Love and murder.
And killing, you know. It makes sense.
Yeah. Different times.
Yeah. Well, what do you think? Should we take some questions from the crowd? I'm sure you guys have questions about love.
Yes.
I love your beginning description of the Silk Road. As a fifth grade teacher, how can I inspire? What did you do to learn about it? How can I teach about the Silk Road that makes it interesting and not boring? For example, I didn't know merchants only went from one place to the other.
Yeah.
How can we learn about this in a fun way?
Well, I'm a book publisher, and so books are always a good answer. But no, not mine necessarily. There's actually, I think being really specific is really helpful. So there are some really great textbooks, right, on the Silk Road, and they have great pictures, and they'll tell you about the topography, and I think that's lovely. But one of the books that really sparked my imagination, and I will look up the bibliography, very helpful back matter as well here in this book. And in it, this is it. It's Susan Whitfield's Life Along the Silk Road. I think she did such a great job. She's a scholar in the UK of that region, but she wrote a book where she just took 7 different peoples. And by people, I mean she kind of took like a specific idea. So one was a merchant, obviously my favorite chapter, but another was a princess, another was one of them was a farmer. And she just wrote what their life would be like a day in the life of a particular person. And she made that up. I thought she did such a good job of being very specific. Like, what did they do in the afternoon? What sort of tea might they eat? And of course, she's making some of this up by using her sort of vast knowledge on the topic. But, that one person didn't exist, but that, their type may have. And I think that kind of reading is always just really fascinating, being very specific and thinking of putting yourself there. Yeah, and I also just I love a lot of just like camera footage of like the the YouTube has unbelievable just video of for hours of just a drone flying over things, and I find that really beautiful. But so Susan Whitfield and YouTube are the two best. Sure. Oh, the young man right there in the green shirt.
How did you impersonate yourself into this story? Like, in many of the characters, how did you sort of not create them, but how did you create the personality for them? What's the inspiration for that?
Yeah, how did I create the personality for them? That's a really good question because it's really challenging when you're trying to think about like multiple people being human at the same time, right? Well, one of the questions I end up asking a lot is, so how did I make myself is pretty easy. I know myself best out of all these characters. Finding, creating, let's say a character who's like my dad or a character who is his enemy and who might hate him a lot for a lot of reasons. One of the things I always do is I always sit, one of the first like, I guess I wouldn't call it a rule, but a good rule of thumb. When I enter a scene, I always ask myself, like, what are my five senses? So what do I smell in the room? What do I hear? What do I see? And then I always ask, what does everybody want out of this moment? So, and sometimes they can just want like, well, this character just wants rest, and this character is being annoying, right? So it's not as if they need to want a jewel, but I do want to know why they're there. What are they doing? Because at any given point, you're in a room. If you need to go to the bathroom, you're going to be like, well, I want to go to the bathroom more than I want to be in here, so I just get up and go. You don't think about that, but it is what you're up to. That's why your feet are moving. So I sort of ask those questions, and that often, when you start to ask yourself, what are all these people doing in this space, and what do they want? I usually get to different personalities pretty quickly. That's a great question.
Anyone else? Questions?
I think we have time for one more. We're at 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Do you want to go that way? Bilal, you ask. Who should?
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm picking the person.
Yes, you. Perfect. Yes.
So I'm curious, you said it was like 6 centuries or 5 centuries, right? And so they
Yeah.
did you just pick like one sector? Like, imagine it changed over time. So how did you pick the
Yeah, it changed quite a lot, and that was actually that's a great question because it was really hard. What I wanted, the way we chose, or I chose, like what time period was I worked backwards from who I wanted there. So I really wanted to have a Mongolian gunner. He was an archer who's working with gunpowder. And so you have to look at, okay, so gunpowder is invented in China, so we need time for the Mongolians to experience it. And it gets invented in the like early 11th century. I'm like, okay, so I can't be in the 4th century if I want gunpowder. But then I also wanted to have, this is why, for example, there are no ninjas in the story, but I would have absolutely inserted ninjas if I had the time period.
Ninjas are awesome.
So it really, you're kind of looking at the circle of, okay, around that time, actually, all the why is a Viking berserker, which is Western Europe, why is this person on the Silk Road? Well, around that time, actually, the Jarl of that space actually exiled them, sent them away because they were too chaotic. And so it's not too hard a leap to say to yourself, oh, okay, well, they were in that period of time exiled and sent away. Now, this one went a little farther than the rest, right? The Roman army was, at this time, it was in Byzantium. It was not the height of Roman Empire. So I had a few Roman soldiers in Turkey. And so I was able to kind of, and I put this in the back of the book trying to explain, like, I know this reads like a cartoon, but it's actually plausible and possible. And so, but ninjas were the great loss. And I apologize. Maybe in a sequel, we'll jump forward in time and there'll be some ninjas. But thank you. All right, I think that's it for us.
Well, I mean, I think I got one more really quick
Okay,
question.
hit me.
I want to know, because hopefully we got some future writers in the crowd here, or current writers, by that chance. But I want to know, what advice would you give to someone who's interested in writing, and why do you think it's important?
Oh, well, so my best advice for writing is different than why it's important. My best advice is there's like I find there's like two kinds of mistakes you can make. One is repeat something too many times, and the other is perfect something too much. So I have friends who will sit there and try to perfect one thing for 10 years, and that can be really a challenge. And then I have also other friends who will, and both of them are me, but who'll just like repeat over and over again, but they don't take the time to polish anything. So they might have like 50 stories, but none of them did they take the time to like take to completion. And over here, there's just one, and they're babying it a little too much. And I think the mixture of like repetition and perfection is like that's the challenge. So my encouragement would be to write and then go back and revise and see how that works out for you. Why it's important is too big a question to answer in the moment, other than the fact that as the theme of this whole festival is that everyone has a story. Like this is a story that I was able to write because I spent the last 10 years obsessed about the Taklamakan Desert. But if you asked me to write about something else, it would be a challenge during those 10 years. But everyone else is doing something else with their time and their experience and their relationships and their family, and as a result, they're going to come up with a different mixture, and I'll be fascinated to see each of those as well. And so that's why it'd be important.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a great piece of wisdom. Well, please give it up for Daniel.
Thank you.
Go buy his new book. It's amazing.